My name is Ginger Steinman, and I was 29 years old when I realized that the people who talk the most about family are often the first to betray you. My grandmother used to tell me that family promises were sacred, that blood was thicker than contracts, thicker than logic, thicker than anything written on paper. When I was a kid, I believed her without question. She said it softly, like wisdom passed down through generations, usually while stirring soup in her tiny kitchen or folding laundry that smelled faintly of lavender. I carried those words with me for years, right up until the moment I came home from a work trip and found my older brother living in my apartment. It had been a long week, delayed flights, endless meetings. All I wanted was to step into my quiet space, kick off my shoes, and collapse onto my couch with a glass of wine. As the elevator creaked up my building in Manhattan, I already pictured it. The way the late afternoon light spilled through my windows, the faint scent of the lavender plant I kept on the sill, the comfort of being somewhere that was fully, undeniably mine. The elevator doors opened. The hallway looked the same. Dim lights, old carpet, that familiar smell of dampness mixed with cheap bleach from the morning cleaning crew. But when I reached my apartment door, something felt wrong. The door wasn't shut. At first, I thought maybe I'd forgotten to lock it. That thought alone made my stomach tighten. I never forgot. I stepped closer and noticed something else. The lock itself looked different, newer, shinier. My heart skipped. I pushed the door open slowly. The smell hit me first. Not lavender, not coffee, not me. Baby formula. Sweet cereal. Someone else's life lingering heavily in the air. Oh, look who's back. The voice came from my living room. My older brother Evan sat on my couch like he belonged there, his feet propped up on my coffee table. That table, dark wood with rounded edges, had been my grandmother's. She'd bought it decades ago at a flea market in New Orleans, and I'd spent weeks restoring it myself, sanding it down, polishing it, breathing life back into something she loved. Now it was littered with crumbs and stained cup rings. Beside him sat his wife Marissa, scrolling through her phone, not even pretending to look uncomfortable. On the floor, their son pushed a small toy car back and forth. I froze when I recognized it. My toy car. A tiny blue Camaro my grandfather had given me when I was 6. I'd kept it all these years, tucked away in a memory box. A tight knot formed in my chest. I let my suitcase drop by the door. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, like it was operating independently from my body. Marissa glanced up and smiled. Polite, practiced, fake. "Oh, Ginger, don't freak out. Evan thought that since you were away, we could settle in for a bit." "Settle in," I repeated slowly. Evan stood, stretching his arms like this was his Saturday morning routine. It's been hard finding a decent place with a kid, and, well, this was Grandma's apartment. Grandma's apartment. That's what they called it. Not my apartment. Not the one legally left to me. Not the one with my name clearly printed on the inheritance documents they'd all seen. I looked around. The rug I'd brought back from Morocco was wrinkled and stained with juice. The framed photos I'd carefully arranged on the shelf, gone. The lavender plant I loved had disappeared, replaced by a bulky container of baby formula on the windowsill. They hadn't just moved in. They had overwritten me. "You didn't even tell me," I said quietly. "You didn't ask." Evan sighed, irritation already creeping into his face. "Don't make a big deal out of it. You're alone, Ginger. We're a family. We have a child. Do you really need all this space to yourself?" There it was, that familiar implication, that my life somehow mattered less because it didn't look like theirs. "This apartment was left to me," I said, my jaw tightening. "Grandma made that clear. It's not for the family, it's mine." Marissa scoffed. "If you were generous, this conversation wouldn't even be happening." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "If you were decent people, we wouldn't be having it either." Evan's expression hardened. "Mom and Dad agree with us." The words landed like a punch to the chest. So they knew. All this time, I'd been hoping, stupidly, that this was just Evan and Marissa acting on impulse, that my parents would be shocked, that they'd be on my side. I crossed my arms, forcing myself to stay calm. "Interesting. Because legally, you're trespassing." Marissa finally put her phone down. "Oh my God, Ginger, don't be dramatic. You have money. You can rent somewhere else." I stared at her. "Excuse me?" Evan stepped in, using that familiar, soothing tone he'd perfected growing up. "We're just asking you to share, temporarily. It would really help us out." "Share?" I repeated. "You changed the locks. You packed my things. That's not sharing." Marissa rolled her eyes. "You're so selfish." And you're freeloaders, I shot back without hesitation. For the first time, I noticed something shift. Marissa moved slightly behind Evan. Evan's jaw tightened. You don't have to make this ugly, he said. Oh, really? I gestured around the apartment, because breaking into someone's home and boxing up their life already crossed that line. I took out my phone. I have the inheritance papers, I said calmly. I have proof you changed the locks and moved in without my permission. We can let a judge decide how this plays out. Evan went pale. You wouldn't, he said. You wouldn't take your own brother to court. I met his eyes without flinching. Watch me. For the first time since I walked in, silence filled the room. They had expected guilt, compliance, the version of me who always gave in. They hadn't expected resistance. I didn't have every step figured out yet. But standing there, surrounded by my boxed-up life, one thing was clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an invasion, and I was done being the one who stepped aside. I didn't leave the apartment right away. I stood there for a moment longer, my phone still in my hand, watching Evan and Marissa try to recalibrate. They were so used to me bending that they hadn't prepared for what came next. No raised voice, no tears, just facts. Evan cleared his throat first. Ginger, come on, let's not do something we can't take back. I tilted my head. You mean like breaking into my apartment? Changing the locks? Packing my things? Marissa huffed. You're acting like we're criminals. I looked at the door, then back at her. You changed the locks. Without permission. What would you call that? Silence again. Thick. Uncomfortable. Evan ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. We're not saying this is permanent, just until we get on our feet. You didn't ask, I said. You decided. Well, you were away, Marissa snapped. It seemed logical. Logical. I glanced toward the hallway where my life had been reduced to cardboard boxes. My clothes, my books, old journals. Photographs I hadn't even noticed were missing yet. They hadn't just moved in. They'd curated me out. You gave yourselves the master bedroom, I said quietly. Marissa shrugged. It made sense with the baby. Of course it did. Evan stepped closer, lowering his voice the way he always did when he wanted to sound reasonable. Mom says you've always been independent, strong. You don't need help the way we do. There it was, the compliment that was really a leash. So because I managed my life responsibly, I replied, you get to take it? You're twisting this, he said, irritation creeping back in. Family helps family. I laughed, short and sharp. Funny how that only works in one direction. Marissa crossed her arms. Don't be heartless. Think about your nephew. I did think about him. I thought about how unfair it was that a child was being used as a bargaining chip, how my parents had taught Evan early on that consequences were optional because someone else, usually me, would absorb them. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. You have 48 hours, I said evenly. After that, I call the police. Or my lawyer. Maybe both. Evan's eyes widened. You can't be serious. I am, Marissa scoffed. You wouldn't dare. I smiled, calm and cold. Try me. That finally did it. Evan exhaled hard, frustration replacing disbelief. Fine. We'll figure something out. You will, I said. Somewhere else. I picked up one of my boxes and headed for the door. Just before I stepped out, I turned back. And if anything is missing, I added, I press charges anyway. Neither of them answered. The stairwell felt colder than usual as I walked down, my pulse loud in my ears. I didn't trust myself to take the elevator. Too enclosed, too quiet. I needed motion. Once outside, the city noise hit me like a wave. Car horns, voices, footsteps. Life moving forward while mine had just been hijacked. I didn't wait. First call, a locksmith. I wasn't about to let them change the locks again while pretending they needed more time. Second call, my lawyer. Yes, I had one. Something my family loved to mock me for. Always planning for the worst, Mom used to say. Turns out I'd been planning for them. Third call, my mother. She picked up on the second ring. Ginger, sweetheart, she said, her voice already coated in concern. Evan told me you had a bit of a meltdown. I closed my eyes. How long did you know? I asked. A pause. Just long enough. Don't frame it like that, she replied. They have a child. They needed stability. So you knew. Family helps family, she said, like a reflex. Did you know they changed the locks? Another pause, longer this time. It's temporary, she said. You don't need to escalate things. I felt something settle in my chest. Heavy, final. If I broke into Evan's house, I asked quietly, changed the locks and told him to live somewhere else, would you be defending me? Silence. That's what I thought, I said. Family doesn't steal from family, Mom. Ginger. I hung up. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A text from Evan. Then Marissa. Then my father. I didn't read them. The next 2 days were relentless. Voicemails stacked up, messages dripping with guilt. Do you really want your nephew homeless? You're tearing this family apart. This isn't how your grandmother raised you. That last one almost made me laugh. At exactly 7 a.m. on the second day, the locksmith arrived. He examined the door, frowning. So they changed this without your permission? Yes, I said, and now I want it back. 30 minutes later, the locks were mine again. Ownership restored, boundaries reinforced. At noon, Evan called. I ignored it. At 5, he showed up. He pounded on the door like he owned it. Ginger, open the door. I sat on my couch, coffee in hand, listening. After 10 minutes, he left. The message was clear. The next morning, my mother asked to meet. We sat in a cafe near her house, the same one we'd gone to for years. She wore her familiar expression. Tired, wounded, disappointed. This has gone too far, she said. Evan is devastated. He's devastated because he can't live in my apartment for free anymore. He's your brother. He's not my responsibility. Her lips pressed together. Why are you doing this? I leaned forward. Because for the first time in my life, I'm not letting anyone walk all over me. She didn't argue. She just stood up, grabbed her coat, and said quietly, I hope one day you understand what it means to be family. I watched her walk away. That night, I found an envelope slid under my door. Inside was a note from Evan. Congratulations. You won. Don't be surprised when one day you need something and no one is there for you. I tore it in half and dropped it in the trash. He was wrong about one thing. I hadn't won, but I had finally stopped losing. The silence after Evan left was almost unsettling. For years, silence in my apartment had meant loneliness. Coming home after long days, dropping my keys on the counter, realizing there was no one to ask how my day went. But now the quiet felt different. Heavy, charged, like the calm after something irrevocable had been set in motion. I slept poorly that night, not because I regretted anything, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying old scenes I'd never questioned before. Evan borrowing money. Just until next month. Mom asking me to be understanding because you know how he is. Dad staying quiet, always quiet, as if neutrality made him innocent. By morning, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. The apartment wasn't the real issue. It was just the first time I'd said no. The fallout came fast. At 8:12 a.m., my phone rang. Dad? I stared at the screen for a full 5 seconds before answering. What? There was a long sigh on the other end. Ginger, your mother and I think this has gotten out of hand. I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the sunlight spilling across the floor, my floor. You mean because Evan finally has consequences? He has a child, Dad said, like it was a magic phrase that erased everything else. And I have a legal deed, I replied. Funny how that never mattered to you. That's not fair, he said weakly. I laughed softly. It's exactly fair. You just don't like where fairness landed this time. He hesitated. He's staying with a friend right now. Good, I said. That's what adults do when they don't have a place. Ginger! I'm not paying for his mistakes, I interrupted. Not with money, not with space, not with my sanity. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I'd never spoken to my father like that. Ever. The obedient daughter in me screamed that I'd gone too far. But another part of me, older, steadier, felt relief. By noon, the messages shifted in tone. Marissa texted first. I know you're angry, but Evan is really struggling. He's depressed. Can we talk like adults? Depressed. I stared at the word for a long time. I wondered if she knew how insulting it sounded, to label entitlement as suffering, to pretend their discomfort outweighed years of mine. I didn't reply. I blocked her number instead. That night, I found myself pacing the apartment, touching things as if reassuring myself they were still there. The armchair that smelled faintly of my grandmother's perfume, the bookshelf I'd assembled alone after Evan canceled last minute, the walls that had witnessed my quiet victories. This place had always been my refuge. Now it felt like a battleground I'd finally secured. Weeks passed. The storm quieted, not because it had ended, but because my family had realized guilt no longer worked on me. A cousin eventually filled in the gaps during a family gathering I almost skipped. They're renting a tiny place in New Jersey now, she whispered over coffee, eyes wide with fascination. Evan hates the commute. I nodded. I'm sure. And Marissa left him. That caught my attention. She said she was tired of him doing nothing, my cousin continued. Took the kid. Filed for divorce. I took a slow sip of wine, letting the information settle. Karma didn't arrive dramatically. It came quietly, methodically, like interest compounding over time. The next time I saw Evan was by accident. I was walking past a coffee shop near my office when I noticed him through the window, sitting alone, staring at his phone like it had personally betrayed him. He looked thinner, smaller. Our eyes met. For a brief second, the past hovered between us. Childhood birthdays, shared secrets, everything we'd never resolved. Then I kept walking. So did he. That night, back in my apartment, I sat on the couch and opened my laptop. I'd been circling the idea for days, typing and deleting, unsure whether I wanted the world's opinion or just needed to be heard. I titled the post simply, "My brother took over my apartment because he needed it more." The words poured out faster than I expected. The locks, the boxes, the parents, the guilt, the threats, the silence. When I finished, I stared at the final question blinking on the screen. Should I forgive them or cut them off for good? My finger hovered over the mouse. Then I clicked post. I woke up to chaos. Hundreds of notifications, then thousands. My story had exploded. People dissected it like a television series. Some praised me, some condemned me. Others did both at once. But the comments that unsettled me weren't the cruel ones. They were the reasonable ones. I get why you're upset, but he had a kid. It was your grandmother's place. Was it fair that only you got it? Changing the locks in 48 hours seems extreme. One comment stopped me cold. Seems like no matter what you did, your parents were always going to choose your brother. I closed my laptop, because that one didn't feel like an opinion. It felt like a diagnosis. All my life, Evan had been the default choice. The son, the firstborn, the one whose failures were forgiven and whose needs were prioritized. I'd been the backup plan, the strong one, the understanding one, the one who didn't need anything, except that I had. I'd needed someone to say, "You're right," to say, "This is yours," to choose me, even once. I realized then that the apartment wasn't what hurt the most. It was the confirmation. That when it came down to it, they'd still rather lose me than inconvenience him. I lay back on the couch, staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzing with more notifications. I didn't know yet what I was going to do about my parents. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, it would be on my terms. I didn't open Reddit again that day. I couldn't. The comments had done their damage. Not because they were cruel, but because they were precise. They peeled back layers I'd spent years convincing myself didn't exist. That I was fine, independent, untouched by favoritism. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about my grandmother. She was the only one who never treated me like a consolation prize. When my parents were busy praising Evan's mediocrity, she noticed my effort. When I came home with straight A's and got told, "That's expected of you," she made hot chocolate and told me she was proud. My mother never liked her much. They clashed constantly, and as a kid, I never understood why, until now. In my mother's eyes, I was never fully hers. I was her mother-in-law's granddaughter, a reminder of someone she resented. That was why the apartment mattered. Not because of the walls or the location, but because it was proof that someone had chosen me, clearly, deliberately, without conditions. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. "Dad." I stared at it for a long time before answering. "Ginger," he said carefully, "your mother's worried." I almost laughed. "About what?" There was a pause. About the family, about things being broken. Broken. Not about what they'd done, not about how they'd treated me, just about the consequences finally landing. "You weren't worried when they locked me out of my own home," I said quietly. "That wasn't—" "It was exactly that," I cut in. "And you let it happen." He sighed. "What do you want us to do now?" That question stopped me. What did I want? An apology? I'd heard half-hearted ones my entire life. Accountability? They didn't even believe they were wrong. Reconciliation? At what cost? My silence again. "I want honesty," I said finally. "I want you to admit that you've always taken Evan's side, even when he was wrong." Silence stretched on the line. Dad didn't answer, and that was my answer. "I need space," I said. "Don't call me for a while." When I hung up, my hands didn't shake this time. Weeks turned into months. Life settled into something calmer, cleaner. I redecorated the apartment, not because it needed it, but because I did. I moved the armchair closer to the window, put my photos back on the shelves, bought a new lavender plant, and watched it grow. No one asked me to give anything up. No one expected anything from me. That freedom felt strange at first, almost lonely, but it was honest. I heard updates through distant relatives. Evan was struggling. The divorce was ugly. Money was tight. My parents were helping where they could, quietly, desperately. They never asked me for help again. And that hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted to give it, but because it confirmed something painful. They only reached out when they needed something from me. One evening, months later, I opened Reddit again. I reread my post. This time, I didn't scroll through the comments. I focused on my own words, on the question at the end. Should I forgive them or cut them off forever? I realized something then. Those weren't my only options. Forgiveness didn't have to mean access. Distance didn't have to mean hatred. I could accept the truth without reopening the wound. I closed my laptop and stood, walking through my apartment slowly. Sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating every corner. No toys, no choose voices, no boxes, just peace. For the first time, my home reflected my life. Not borrowed, not invaded, not negotiated. Chosen. I didn't know if I would ever reconcile with my parents, or if Evan and I would ever speak again. But I finally understood something my grandmother had tried to teach me in her own quiet way. Family isn't about who feels entitled to you. It's about who respects you when you say no. And this time, I was choosing myself.